your little pictures. John, do you want to say anything to kick us off?
No, go ahead. I just started the recording, so I'll mute myself too.
Okay. I think I'm skimming through names here real quick. I think I've met everybody, but I'll introduce myself anyway in case there's someone who joins or who watches later. I'm Kristen Coyle. I'm the Dean for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and my disciplinary background is clinical psychology. And burnout just seemed like a really timely topic. So burnout it was. Part of what made it seem so timely is that I had the sad pleasure of reading some really wonderful in-depth responses on a faculty feedback survey from the class, faculty, and staff this spring. And some of the responses were, they were definitely in-depth. Some were kind of intense and sad. Some were funny. But there were things like, we've gone from juggling bowling balls to juggling chainsaws. Going to remote teaching has been a personal, professional, and pedagogical catastrophe. We're doing the best we can. The work is exhausting. Work-life balance is a joke, especially with families at home. So those are the more burnout-related ones. There were also some really beautiful, encouraging ones, but mostly people were saying they were working really, really hard. They were trying their best, and they were disappointed with themselves, which was a hard thing to see, and it's a hard thing to experience, because when people are working really hard, it's hard to feel like you're also not doing your best work. So let's talk. That's kind of a perfect recipe for burnout, by the way. So let's talk some about burnout. So I'm going to share my screen if I can remember where that is. There it is. Okay, can you see that? John or Ranjit, for some reason, you two are the ones on my screen. Not if you can see my slides. Okay, good deal. So, rising above burnout. This is actually an image from an MD that an MD created about being drowned by medical paperwork, but it seems like a great image to kind of summarize also a faculty experience. So what is burnout to start with? It's a prolonged response to chronic situational stressors on the job. The World Health Organization calls it an occupational phenomenon. So we need to be really clear at the get-go. This is not a mental illness. It's not a medical condition. It's not an individual weakness. It's a response to difficult work situation. An analogy that Christina Maslach sometimes uses, and basically most of what we talk about today is going to be based on her work. She's a social psychologist at UC Berkeley and is the kind of has been the driving force in burnout research since the 1980s. One of the analogies that she uses that has pros and cons is the canary in the coal mine. If a canary is in a coal mine and dies or comes out real sick, you don't say that the canary needs to be tougher or that there is something wrong with the canary or that the canary should have better resilience. You say that there's something wrong in the coal mine. So this is not an individual problem. This is a problem of a work situation and, in more human terms, work and individual situation together. So in Dr. Maslach's research, there are three components of burnout. There's an exhaustion component, a cynicism component, and an ineffectiveness component. So the exhaustion component, some of the phrases that sum that up: I feel emotionally drained. I feel tired when I get up in the morning and have to face another day at work. I feel used up at the end of a workday. The cynicism component: I've become more callous and uncaring towards my students and colleagues. I don't really care what happens to some of my students. I worry that work is hardening me emotionally. And the ineffectiveness component: I don't feel like I'm positively influencing others. I feel like I'm not accomplishing worthwhile things. I feel like I'm not helpful to my colleagues. And these kind of examples are adapted from Dr. Maslach's work. And you hear some of these things, sometimes you say them yourself, sometimes you see them on social media from your colleagues, or you hear it from colleagues as well, like this student complained about this assignment that they were overwhelmed. Well, that's too bad. That's a callous or cynical response. That it's too bad the student is feeling that way. I'm not going to do anything about it. I am too tired. I'm too tired to be able to handle the kind of overwhelming stream of student concerns. An exhaustion and cynicism response together. I haven't been able to do anything on my research. I feel like I'm not making any progress. Or I've been writing, but I'm not writing anything good. Or I've been able to read some research, but I can't retain any of it. That's an ineffectiveness kind of response. All of those go together with burnout. Of course, there are some examples of different burnout profiles or different ways that people experience burnout. And here are some of the examples. In the Maslow burnout inventory, which is the way that it's commonly assessed in research, there are 3 subscales that align to the 3 different components of burnout, and not everyone experiences it in the same way. So some people can have high scores in all 3 areas. They can experience being exhausted, cynical, and ineffective. But other people have just peaks in different areas. So they can feel exhausted, but still emotionally engaged and feel like that they are accomplishing things. They're just really, really, really tired. They can, or people can be highly disengaged, but not exhausted and not feeling ineffective, and so on. So if we look at kind of the idea that burnout comes from job person fit, there are a number of areas that kind of fit is critical. So what you want to see, for example, is workload that aligns to somebody's expectations and what they're able to accomplish. So the workload is manageable with time to rest and recover. If you experience your job as being too much work to be able to accomplish each day, then it contributes to burnout. Control as well is an important component. So individuals who experience control in their jobs are less likely to experience burnout, which is related to stress research in all kinds of domains. If you feel control in a particular domain of your life, you're less likely to be severely stressed. So if you feel like you can, for example, influence decisions that affect your workplace, if you feel like you can exercise professional autonomy and make decisions that are important to you and how you do your job, if you feel like you can get access to resources that you need in order to do your job effectively, all of that contributes to a feeling of control. And interestingly, there's kind of mixed kind of contributors to faculty burnout. On the one side, faculty tend to have more control over their work experience than people do in some other job sectors. But on the other hand, it's a highly compassion-oriented field. People who go into teaching roles in particular tend to go into teaching roles because they are very high in compassion and they want to make a difference in students' lives, and that makes them more susceptible to burnout. But for control, you see differences in people's experience of burnout. Another example, people who are tenured tend to experience more control. They feel like they have more control over their professional pathway than people who are untenured. And for that reason, people who are tenured are at somewhat lower risk of burnout than people who are untenured. Reward is another aspect of job and person fit. Reward is the idea that you get the financial, resource, social rewards that are commensurate with your job. If you feel like you're doing a good job, somebody notices and says, good job. If you feel like you're working really hard, you should be paid for working really hard. That's the idea of reward. Community is the job-related relationships. And if job-related relationships are characterized by social support and effective conflict management, then people tend to experience less burnout. And you see this at universities, particularly where there are academic subcultures that are particularly healthy or unhealthy. You may hear from colleagues, for example, that X department at some university is a nightmare to work in because people are always trying to tear each other down. And that those faculty cycle out very quickly because they experience a lot of burnout in that department. Whereas down the hall in another department, there may be a completely different experience because they work together so well and they work hard on maintaining a sense of community and social support. Fairness is another important area. Decisions, what you want to see, of course, is that decisions at work are perceived as fair and equitable. When people think that decisions are being made in an unfair or inequitable way, it contributes to burnout. And the last of these 6 areas is values. Individuals, this is where your ideals and motivations, the things that drive you that are relevant to the workplace, are consistent with decision making at the workplace. So you see this in universities, for example. Faculty tend to, as a broad generalization, tend to not be highly economically motivated. They often go into faculty roles, depending on the area, knowing that they are going to make less money over their lifetime than they might in another sector. So if they see the university making decisions that are solely economically motivated, it doesn't jive with their values of putting education and student welfare first. And it can make people less satisfied with the university that they work with. So these are some of the areas that, at least in the burnout research, that they look at to see where kind of the sources for burnout are coming from. There are some, of course, additional kind of specific contributing factors, and these interact with those 6. So for example, pressure for competing roles. If, and this is something that I've heard a lot this semester in particular, if you are trying to do an excellent job with your students, but you're also trying to do an excellent job with your small children and your elderly parents that need help, that additional pressure adds to conflict in all of those areas, particularly in workload. Just the perceived workload overall goes up, but there can also be issues of value conflicts and community when your colleagues don't understand all the pressures. Pressures from others can also be something that can increase experiences of burnout. This one, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, these can increase burnout, but more in the sense that it can be a mismatch sometimes to the workplace. And I mean that that's phrased in very vanilla language, but what I really mean is if someone with a disability is in a particular workplace and is not being appropriately accommodated, their job is going to be much, much harder. Their colleague who sits next to them may be having a great experience at work and not experiencing burnout, and not recognize that their disabled colleague has to work twice as hard, literally, to get the job done because they're not being accommodated. Similarly, if the workplace is kind of fraught with discrimination or racism or gender discrimination, those increase burnout because it again, it can increase the workload, it can create a values mismatch. There are so many different ways, and people who are outside of that lens may not see it. Previous job history can contribute to burnout, particularly traumatic previous job history. Someone has been sensitized to experiences of burnout, they may be more likely to see it coming again, which again is not, that doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with them or that they're more vulnerable. They just may have a lens where they can see issues that are creating burnout faster than other people can see it. Tenure status, we already talked about. So there are a number of different specific factors that can also contribute here. So we're going to talk about some specific approaches to handling burnout at an individual level. But before we do that, I want to make an important point. So there are 3 ways to approach it. 1, you can support individuals who are experiencing burnout. 1, you can help people build resilience so that later they're more likely to not experience burnout. Or you can develop stronger workplace practices to prevent burnout. Now, if I were to poll all of you, you would tell me which one of these is the most powerful, but I'll just tell you, it's that 3rd one, right? If you develop workplace strategies that prevent burnout, that is by far hugely much more effective than the other strategies. Only unfortunately, that's not what we're going to be focusing on today. But I do want to say, I'm going to say it again, burnout is not an individual flaw or weakness. It's a response to a stressful work situation. And there are ways to address the stressful work situation. Every time you serve on a committee and you say, things aren't going the way we want it to, let's change the way the university works. You're making it a better place to work and a way that, and exercising control over your environment. That by itself decreases burnout. Every time you say, the way that these decisions are being made isn't fair. The way these students are being treated isn't fair, and you ask for that to be changed. That's developing a stronger workplace. That's helping to reduce burnout. But now we're going to talk about individual strategies. Because as an individual at this time, that's what you have the most control over. So that's what we're going to focus on, even though overall workplace strategies are the most powerful. So some individual strategies. Ready? So we talked about the 3 components of burnout: exhaustion, cynicism, ineffectiveness. And some of you might identify with one of those more than others. So for example, for me, I tend to get emotionally exhausted and feel like I'm kind of spinning my wheels at work, but I don't tend towards cynicism. So I know that that exhaustion and ineffectiveness are the 2 that kind of connect with me the most. So if we're talking about individual strategies to combat burnout, we're really talking about how do you build emotional energy? How do you continue to emotionally engage and experience compassion, even when you're feeling emotionally tired? And how do you have a consistent experience of being effective and accomplished? So we're going to be kind of honing in on those 3 pieces. So I put them up in the corner here. Energy. The funny thing is, I put those up in the corner, but I can't see them right now. Hold on. Energy, there we go. Energy, engagement, and effectiveness. So some strategies. First, remember why you're teaching. So start with that. What is it that drew you to academia? And as you refocus on the reasons that drew you to academia, how can you build that kind of understanding more into your day-to-day? So for me, I really enjoyed teaching. I enjoy thinking about how motivation and how people work, how kind of the whole human picture sticks together, which is what drew me to psychology. And I also, I wanted to do something where you do a lot of different things. And academics do a lot of different things, bouncing from one thing to another. And when I start to feel exhausted, I understand that if I am, for example, I get a lot of email. It might not surprise you to know I get a lot of email, and I find it very fatiguing. The longer I do email, the more tired I get. And since I know it's motivating for me to do a lot of different things, I have to space out my email in little chunks. Otherwise, I get too emotionally exhausted to continue for the day. So first, think about what drew you to academia and see if you can figure out a way to build that into your day. Now, this one you all know, right? Burnout is a stress response. So if you build your physical resilience, it helps to reduce the impact of the stress on your body. We don't have to talk about that in a lot of detail because I know I'm preaching to the choir here that you already know this. And we all have physical resilience goals that we would like to be able to meet. So this is keeping yourself fed, making sure that you are maintaining some kind of exercise regimen, and sleeping, getting some sleep. If you have a choice between sleep and a bunch of other things, put sleep first. It dramatically increases your emotional and physical resilience. Third one, set time barriers. One of the things that makes academia an appealing profession is that you can do things when you want to do them. So if you want to take a nap in the middle of the day, work on a lecture in the middle of the night, take a walk when the weather is perfect for you, even if it's during regular work hours, you can completely do that. The downside of that, of course, is that you don't have any built-in time barriers, so you're never off the clock. And graduate school in particular is a long socialization period of constantly working. Grad students are often told by their advisors that they should be constantly working. And even if they're not explicitly told that, they're given so much work to do that you're expected to work day and night, weekdays and weekends. So once you're heavily socialized into that through grad school and postdoc, by the time you get to be a faculty member, you're very well socialized into expecting yourself to work day and night, weekdays and weekends. The problem with that is that when work is stressful and you feel it constantly picking away at you, you're never off the clock, so it's always picking. So set time barriers. For some people, that's 8 to 5. And I know we have at least a few faculty who work 8 to 5, and they do it really strictly, and they tend to be highly productive. For me, it's not 8 to 5. It just doesn't work for me that way, but I have to set some time where I say, this is the time I am not working. Otherwise, I feel guilty that I'm not accomplishing the things that I want to accomplish when I'm not working, even though I'm not working. Plan fun things and do them even if you don't feel like it. Right? Plan fun things. When you are feeling really, really stressed, plan something fun. If this is little fun, you can do big fun with a big capital F if you want, all caps, or you can just do lowercase. You say, if I make it through the revision on this paper today, I'm going to watch this movie tonight, little fun. I'm gonna call my friend, little fun. I have been waiting to eat this special food that I like or make this recipe, little fun. And then when it gets time to do that, if you don't feel like doing it, do it anyway. Because part of maintaining emotional resilience is building in positive experiences. And as you get emotionally drained, you have to put positive emotional experiences back in there, even if you don't feel like it, because once you do them, it helps you start to feel better. Here's this fifth one. Recognize compassion fatigue. This is particularly in either working with your students or with your colleagues. When people are telling you things that require a sympathetic response, sometimes it's hard to provide that sympathetic response over and over. So that's compassion fatigue. But part of that difficulty is recognizing that it's happening and that it's not about the person you're talking to. So the 20th student who complains to you that something was too hard or wasn't explained well enough, or that their life is difficult, or that they're having a hard time figuring out what to do in your class, part of it is stepping back and recognizing that when you have a hard time pulling up that compassionate response, that at that moment, it's not because of the student, it's because of you. It's because you've already had to do it 30 times that day. So part of it is stepping back and realizing that if you can't pull it up, it's not that situation, it's that you are drained of it. A quick behavioral kind of strategy for dealing with this is called opposite action. Opposite action is useful to know. You already know it, you probably just don't know it by that term. Opposite action is just useful to know when you're trying to regulate your emotions intentionally. Opposite action is where you are feeling an emotion that you want to change, and you take a specific opposite action to change it. So if you're feeling scared of something that will not actually hurt you, by the way, the quickest way to stop feeling scared of it is to go towards it. You tell your students this all the time with a class presentation, right? I'm afraid of talking in public. Okay, let's get you to do it, because as soon as you start to do it, the fear starts to decline, right? If you're feeling sad, opposite action says that you should do something fun and throw yourself into it, even if you don't feel like it, and your mood will improve. If you're having a hard time pulling up a compassionate response, you throw yourself into a compassionate response, even if you're not feeling it in your heart, and it helps to kind of pull you along into it. So you write that email that says, I'm so sorry to hear that you're struggling with that. When you throw yourself into it, it helps to bring that compassionate response back up. Okay, we're doing 9 short-term strategies here, right? So we're on our 6th one. Make your goals achievable and then celebrate them. Okay, you're gonna laugh if I tell you that I make email goals, but I do. Because you send them out and people just respond and it feels like you're not getting anywhere, so I have to set email goals. Like today, I'm gonna go from this number in my inbox to this number in my inbox. And then when I do that, I have to do something that makes me a little bit happy at the end. Like, woohoo, I made that goal. Otherwise, it just feels like an unending slog. And when I say achievable goals, I mean little achievable goals. So some of you have goals like, I'm going to write 3 articles this summer. That's great. More power to you. How about smaller? Like this week, I'm going to do these 3 things, not write 3 articles unless they're really baby ones. Little achievable goals, and then celebrate them. Part of the struggle of many academics is that they feel like they're never doing enough. And sometimes that is socialized into a university. I really don't, honestly. I don't think that's the case here at SUNY Oswego. But you know, you have colleagues at some universities where they never get feedback towards tenure, for example. They're just told to work as hard as they can and as fast as they can, and then maybe somebody will one day tell them whether or not they're going to get tenured. Yes, this kind of develops this mindset that you should always be doing more and you are never doing enough. That's not a healthy way to live. So we have to each individually fight against it and say, okay, I don't have to do everything all the time. What am I going to do now? I'm going to do this small thing and this small thing. And when I do those 2 small things, I'm going to tell myself, good job, I did those 2 things. That's what I was supposed to do today. I don't have to do everything today. And if you want help, by the way, I will help you. You can email me and say, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to tell you when I did them. And then you tell me when you did them, and I will say, congratulations, you did your things. And I will celebrate with you. This one, exercise control where you have control. We said that control is one of the factors, the kind of job individual factor that either contributes towards burnout or fights against burnout. Faculty do have a significant amount of control over certain aspects of their work, but sometimes people don't exercise as much control as they have. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. One, I worked with a faculty member who taught a first-year seminar, and it really was a very heavy load at that institution. They taught several sections, and they were the primary advisor for all of the students in those sections. So she had over 100 students to advise and a full course load to teach. And she would talk about how stressed she was in her work, how she didn't even have time to go to the bathroom or eat because she was so busy meeting individually with students. So what is the problem there? None of her students told her she couldn't go to the bathroom or eat. Nobody around her told her she couldn't go to the bathroom or eat. She believed that the structure around her was controlling her physically, but all of her colleagues went to the bathroom and ate. So we had to coach her to be able to say things like, I'm happy to sit down with you. I know you have questions. Give me 10 minutes to step into the restroom, or I was just about to eat my lunch. If she wanted private time, she could say, give me 15 minutes to eat my lunch, or you can come in and talk with me while I eat. Exercise control where you have control. Similarly, I know many of you have probably gone through this personally, where you think, why did I assign papers X, Y, and Z this semester? It is killing me to give feedback. Exercise control where you have control. So instead of assigning the same X, Y, and Z papers next semester, you think, oh, I'm not ever going to do that to myself again. How am I going to meet the same learning outcomes in a way that doesn't kill me? Am I going to build in some peer feedback? Am I going to have them do self-reflection that reduces the amount of feedback I have to give? Am I going to change some of these papers to be less laborious to grade or for them to write? Or am I going to have them do some other kind of project? So exercise control where you have control. Engage your social support network. This one is really, really powerful. My one caveat, by the way, is if you do this on social media, please don't complain about your students. It really doesn't look good. Just please don't. We know how easily students are wounded by seeing faculty post things, even if it's not personally named, but they will look you up. And if you have posted stuff complaining about your students, it changes the way that they think about it. So just please don't post about your students. But other than that, engage your social support network. Talk to your partner, your parents, your friends, your colleagues. Talk about what you're experiencing. Building a community of support around you is something that helps to directly combat many kinds of stress, including burnout. And it's something that I've seen some faculty do particularly well this semester, where they have understood that this is a remarkably stressful time and that requires remarkable levels of connection. And this one, you should know we have an EAP. You should take advantage of the EAP. Look up the EAP if you've never looked it up. It's free. It's part of your faculty benefits. Not only can they hook you up with short-term counseling, and it is completely confidential, lots of other stuff, legal advice, all kinds of interesting things. And the EAP is particularly useful if you have engaged your social support network and you don't think you're getting the kind of support that you need. And sometimes that's just the way it is, right? That you need to build a social support network in a way that goes beyond the people that you typically have contact with. In addition, I'm just going to mention 2 long-term strategies here because I've seen people use them really, really effectively. One, this is something that is more like career arc focused. One thing that some people do really well, particularly in an academic setting, is that they have a periodic change of focus. I had a wonderful department chair that I worked with for years. She was my department chair 2 or 3 times, several times. And she told me, you know, she'd done a lot of interesting things. She was a great teacher. She had 30 years of naturalistic observation data on a gorilla and a chimpanzee colony. And she had done an unusually high level of service at the university. She had been department chair multiple times. She'd been faculty assembly chair multiple times. She had declined several other opportunities. And she explained how she was able to maintain her equilibrium over a long academic career because she said, when I get tired of dealing with students, I become department chair again. And she was good at it. Or she would throw herself more into a service role and her teaching load would decline. And she would do that for a few years. And then she would say, when I get tired of pushing paper around or dealing with faculty complaints, then I step back into the classroom. When I get tired of doing this, I write a grant. When I get tired of doing that, I do this other thing. And academics have that freedom. There is so much work to be done at a university that all of you have a wide range of choices, unfortunately, which is both a pro and a con of being at a university, that over a long period of time, you have an opportunity to essentially have a somewhat different career for a few years at a time. And that can really help with burnout over time. And then this other long-term strategy, consider refocusing on your strengths. One thing that may not be apparent from the inside, but is from the outside. Most people, especially if you're on tenure track and you're tenured, but even in other roles, most people don't care how long your vita is. You care how long your vita is, but most people don't. Instead, they care about your areas of strength, which means you don't have to do everything all the time. It means over time in a career, you can say, you know what I'm really good at? You know what I really shine at? I can write really amazing grants that bring people together. When those happen, when they're an opportunity for collaborative grants, I'm gonna write those and I'm going to work on those projects. And that's gonna be something that's fulfilling to me and interesting to the university. Or you can say, you know what I'm really good at? I'm really fantastic at mentoring junior colleagues. I'm gonna focus on this piece. So you can refocus in specific areas instead of trying to do everything all the time, because that's exhausting. So I'm gonna take a moment now and look at the lengthy chat. Yes, EAP certainly stands for Employee Assistance Program. Things, okay, so let's go back just a little bit. What about things we have no control over? students emailing us in a panic. This is Bastian's question, and this is really good. Things that need to be dealt with immediately. Another of those, please do these things right now. These are not things that we have control over. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. So you exercise control over things that you have control over. I remember there's this well-adopted time management strategy from Stephen Covey. And if you go to a time management training, it'll often include that. And there are 4 quadrants and stuff like that. And there are things that are urgent and important, and you sort things and stuff. And my question for those was always, well, what if this issue is urgent and important, but not urgent and important to me, only urgent and important to the person who's asking me? What if I don't care at all? Well, and it's still urgent and important was the answer, even though it doesn't help with time management. So instead, you exercise control where you have control. And when you don't, you try and exercise some compassion. So I'm going to, oh, wait, how can I do that? I am now going to add some other ideas here. So you are free. That's I'm going to take a pause on my talking. Feel free to add now. There are ideas you have for combating burnout that could be helpful to your colleagues. Only remember, John muted all of you, so you're going to have to unmute yourself. No thoughts?
Hi, I'm Sally. I arrived a little late, had technical difficulties, so I'm on my iPad without video. I think you were talking about overburdened by email and having to respond to students right as I tuned in here. Do people have guidelines that they have created, or has the college suggested some guidelines so that you're not on a 24-hour call?
How do people handle that?
I can share just briefly the way I handle this, because this is a very personal one for me. Email is the one thing that just makes me feel, yeah, all sorts of things. And so I'm just super, super clear with students. And so so my policy is I will always get back to you within 48 hours, business hours. So that's Monday to Friday. I usually do sooner than that, but that's what I tell them. And then before every assignment is due, I remind them of this policy, and I tell them that, and we sort of talk about why, right? So anyway, I think the point I'm just making is transparency and a very clear policy that I am consistent with.
I think that is a really great point. And it's also a good, there should be no guilt there at all, because what you're setting is a professional expectation, right? I'm a professional in my role. This is how professionals communicate. And we have expectations for each other. So you're not saying I'm slow. You're saying this is a professional expectation. I will get back to you. And here's about how much time it will take.
I'll say, this is Allison Rank. I've also added an expectation along with the business hours that for certain types of questions, I expect them to also propose solutions in their initial email to me. And I give examples of those. So if you can't make my office hour, what I need you to do is tell me 3 additional hour blocks this week that you are available to make. If you think you're going to miss this deadline, what I need you to tell me is what accommodation you think would be reasonable, and if there's anything I can do to help you in getting it figured out, right? Which has at least helped students. It's taken some of the emotional labor away, because I don't have to guess what the problem is or how to solve it. Students are actually coming with, like, here's the thing I'm asking you for, as opposed to just sort of a broader help statement.
Absolutely, and I'll often use a response along the lines of, "I'm so sorry to hear you're struggling with that. Is there something specific that you would like me to do to be helpful?"
Mhm.
Because if it's just a,
I also sometimes email the whole class if there's a question, which is, I feel like in the middle of the assignment, there's something going on with one student who emails a question. I will email a response to the whole class without naming any particular student. So sometimes it may be a problem for somebody else as well. And particularly in these times when we are not meeting students face to face, I feel it's easier to reach out to the whole class and say something to them.
thank you. And I added post there because if you're in an online environment, posting it in Blackboard can also head off.
Okay.
One thing that we've done is we've noticed, Gil and I have both noticed that as we spend more and more time in front of the computer dealing with the days in, days out of not only synchronous teaching, but also dealing with the emails, we've actually set up like 3 or 4 shops throughout the house where we do things. Like there's the workroom where we have the computer, and then we stand with the laptop over there on the coffee table, which is just high enough. Just getting physically around has the advantage of, doing it in a just slightly different environment so that refocuses my energy. I feel the way refocuses my energy to deal with yet another email that comes in. And on the other hand, has the disadvantage that you're always in the same environment where you have fun at home. You are always in the same environment where you work. And that's something we still struggle with. Namely, we don't have the physical distance at the moment. So we take very long walks, much to the chagrin of the dog.
Very long walks. I think that's a strategy a lot of us have been using. Thank you.
Can I just point out that there are some really good comments in the chat? I don't know if you've had a chance to look at those while you've been engaging with voices, but yeah, a couple of them are really specific to this pandemic / world falling apart situation.
Right. I noticed, I was just looking at Taylor's post. How do we deal with the massive shift in priorities in our jobs due to the pandemic? So if you're not looking at it, that's what she says. This is already overwhelming, and the things that contribute to our lack of control are the main stressors. For example, we're the first line of questions for students, but we don't get regular communication about the university's plans or progress about potential reopening plans. That's a ton of emotional labor that could be avoided by workplace changes. All of that is really good. Thank you, Taylor. And I'll add that I know that you are worried about also, regardless of what the plan is, that you're going to have to plan and replan and replan. So the communication that stuff can change mid-fall, so be ready to think about your course one way, but also think about it another and think about it another. I know that is an extremely stressful kind of state to be in. The concrete part of that question, by the way, we don't get communication about the university's plans. Any questions you have, we can try and answer. Unfortunately, the university's plans are still up in the air, and we may not get, as you are, I'm sure, aware, we may not fully get to decide what we get to do. We may get to be told some of the aspects of what we're going to do. So you actually know everything that we know, but we can talk about that too if you want. But how do you deal with kind of a massive shift in job priority and a massive shift in workload, right? It's a really, really good question. So part of, let's look at this one. Part of it is to recognize, Donna says, do your fun. That's really, really good. Part of it is to recognize that if you are feeling exhausted, it's not about you. It's not because of you. It's because you're in an exhausting situation. Absolutely. So there is nothing wrong with feeling exhausted. That's what the normal response is to an abnormal situation. But part of it is also to recognize what the components of burnout and to not do things that feed that burnout monster. So if you are not only exhausted, but you're also feeling ineffective, are there ways that you can structure your time so that you get those little feelings of effectiveness? By the way, part of your job right now is to rest. So if you say, I need to get some rest, that is part of my job right now, you should say, I can rest right now. I have achieved what I was supposed to do. If part of your experience of burnout is cynicism and lack of emotional engagement, don't feed that burnout monster by saying, who cares what happens? Nothing is going to work. It's all going to be terrible. That feeds the experience of burnout. So instead of feeding that experience of burnout, how can you both protect yourself emotionally, but continue to try and engage emotionally? But doing your fun is really good advice, and engaging your social support network is really good advice as well. Pat's question, I'm at a loss in terms of how to gain control over the recent events. Yeah, it's been a bad week. COVID, racial violence, and other social upheavals. How are we supposed to maintain focus on work? What do we do with students who feel the same sense of hopelessness in terms of their future prospects in the world? That is a really hard question, and something that I think everyone can resonate with. Do you have thoughts on how to respond to that?
It's okay if you don't have an answer. I think it's okay to just let go and accept that some things are beyond your control. Just go with it, because you can't control everything. The fact that you don't have an answer, or it's okay. It's fine to not have an answer. It's fine to not be in control.
Exactly. And it's completely fine to be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And to say, this is an overwhelming time. This is terrible. What in the world is going on? It's completely fine. And remind yourself that that is a normal response to an abnormally horrible situation.
I know that I have tried to be very upfront with students about the fact that the professors are also very overwhelmed right now, and that we're also struggling like with mental health and dealing with the differences. And I know that the students really appreciated like very frank honesty about that, and kind of going with like a all hands on deck approach to getting through the semester. But I think that as we're transitioning to summer terms or the fall, it's that question of, okay, things just keep getting worse. So it's trying to find any sense of, normalcy is the wrong word, but trying to find how to gain that personal control in a way that is effective, because many of us had systems in place that just aren't working anymore.
Yes.
My middle name is not Pollyanna, but I will tell you right now that one of the things that helps me is literally before I go to bed at night, writing down 3 things I'm grateful for that happened during the day, because that takes a little bit of the pressure. And I would combine that with what you mentioned before, Kristen, breaking it down into what is one small thing that you can do that you feel control over? So one thing on Facebook, there was a post of a really wonderful yard sign, and I ordered it because it made me feel that I was accomplishing something. And that was something for the 100 years that I worked with Mary Kay Cosmetics. That was one of the things that they had, is just make your small little steps each day, because that can help you. None of us can control what's going on in massive ways, but we can do small little things. Maybe it's a yard sign, maybe it's calling up to encourage a friend, maybe, but I do think that for me personally, focusing on gratitude helps.
And I will say it's also research supported. There's good data that writing down the things you're grateful for boosts your mood over time.
sometimes that's, I mean, I've been through some pretty traumatic personal times, from an abusive marriage to being on welfare for years. And one of the things that I learned was the only thing you can really control in life is your attitude and your response to events. So focusing on gratitude helps me get through day by day. But my name is not Pollyanna.
So I see we are bumping on time. So as a theme, I just want to say burnout is a response to an unusually stressful time and situation. I feel in some ways a little badly communicating individual kind of things that you can do to cope with it, because it's not your individual responsibility to do that. It's the university's job to help you with that. But when you have the most control over what you can do individually. So I still think it's important to talk about that. And I do want to also say, let's see. Thank you. Thank you for all of the amazing work that you have done this last semester, and what you're contemplating for the summer and for the fall, and how to respond to kind of a constantly changing and constantly stressful situation. But I know that the way that you support each other and the way that you support our students, we're going to find a way together to get through this. So again, thank you, and thank you for your great contributions. And have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.